uniformed military, including 1,100 in New Hampshire, who may be affected. They'll be forced to work in defense and protection of our nation without getting paid. It is shameful and it is unacceptable. And during the last shutdown, federal employees had to visit food banks to help get meals when they missed paychecks. And there is no guarantee that the employees of federal contractors will be able to get back pay. As we remember, the last time we had to pass specific legislation to ensure that those people who lost their pay were able to get reimbursed. Now, I've also had the honor of serving as chair of the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee for the past year. Small businesses are the lifeblood of New Hampshire's economy. In fact, they account for more than 99% of all the businesses in our state. 2/3 of the jobs that are created, not just in New Hampshire, but across this country, come from small businesses. And yet the SBA has been unable to give out disaster loans for more than 2 months now. That leaves more than 10,000 hurricane survivors with approved loans that they're not going to get funding for unless we pass this disaster funding. And this isn't a partisan issue. Thousands of families and businesses in Virginia and North Carolina and Florida and Georgia are waiting for these funds. They're in limbo, and here we are, not even a week, less than a week before Christmas. And we're saying to all of those people who have been waiting for months, I'm sorry, we're not going to fund you because billionaire Elon Musk said, don't pass this legislation because it's too expensive. Well, he needs to look at what the cost is of not passing that legislation. And should the federal government close, it is not hyperbole to say that we will be leaving our most vulnerable without proper care this Christmas. I recently met with community health center leaders from New Hampshire. They talked about what they do in their communities. We know that our community health centers provide daily care for uninsured patients, for those who can't afford expensive health insurance, who live with terrible diseases like diabetes and cancer. Our community health centers are the cornerstone of our healthcare safety net, and they rely on federal funding to keep their doors open and provide life-saving care to Americans. But about 70% of community health center funding is going to expire if we don't pass the spending package. Should that funding disappear, health clinics across the country will be forced to close, and the communities they serve will suffer the consequences. The people who President-elect Trump promised to protect are the people who are going to get hurt. And if the shutdown drags on, inspections and enforcement that prevent air and water pollution will cease. That puts public health at risk, especially in our most vulnerable communities. And with a lapse in appropriations, the Forest Service has to stop issuing contracts, including for timber sales, which in New Hampshire, even for a short period of time, can have ripple effects through our local economies because we have towns that depend on that timber economy. A shutdown also leaves forest ranger stations in New Hampshire closed right as we're starting the winter recreation season. And a prolonged government shutdown will lead to delays for food assistance, to Meals on Wheels, where in New Hampshire we have more than 20,000 seniors who will be threatened by or currently experiencing hunger if they don't get their Meals on Wheels. Nationwide, more than 1.5 million meals are provided in states each year. So a shutdown needlessly risks health and well-being. And we know the other thing that's in the package that the House is objecting to is the extension of telehealth benefits for people who need it. Again, an effective, efficient way to provide health care, and they're objecting to it. As chair of the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee that funds the Departments of Commerce and Justice, as well as our science agencies, I'm also concerned that 84% of Department of Commerce employees, about 44,000, will be furloughed if we can't get a continuing resolution done to keep the government open. This includes National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration employees who protect life and property on the job. Also, we have 84% of Department of Justice staff who would be considered essential workers but would be forced to work without pay. In New Hampshire, we have a federal prison in northern New Hampshire that is very important. It's a medium security prison. And what we would be asking those correction officers, those other employees of the prison, is to work without pay, to take an IOU until the government's funded again. So I think this is actually very simple. Democrats and Republicans negotiated in good faith. We agreed to keep the government open through a negotiated process. We agreed to provide disaster relief and to support critical needs for working families. We were ready to vote so we could keep the lights on here, so we could turn the Christmas lights on at home for so many working people across this country. And now, because the world's richest man, Elon Musk, doesn't understand what this bill actually does or how government works, we're facing a shutdown that is going to force Americans to work without pay during the holidays. It's going to leave communities in the lurch without the funding they need to rebuild from the recent natural disasters. So I urge Speaker Johnson to do the right thing. Stick to the agreement he made just this week. Let's bring this deal to the floor, let's get this done, and let's help the people across the country who need the support that we've promised. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was scheduled a couple days ago to come here to the Senate floor to talk about what measures the United States could be taking now to help relieve the suffering in Sudan, and I plan to get to that topic. But since I plan to come talk about that, we have seen this disaster unfolding on Capitol Hill, where an agreement that had been reached in a bipartisan manner between Democrats and Republicans, between the House and the Senate, to prevent a government shutdown and to support critical priorities around the country, how that bipartisan agreement got blown up because of a tweet from Elon Musk, the richest man in the world. And we don't know if he's just decided that he's going to be sort of the kingmaker on Capitol Hill. All I do know is that that was shortly followed by tweets from the president-elect and other members of the Trump family. Who's leading who here, we don't know. All we know is that the end result is very bad for the American people, because federal employees provide all sorts of vital services, from air traffic controllers to nurses and doctors and veterans, hospitals, to the people who look out for the safety of our food. Some of them will be prevented from coming to work. Others will be asked to go to work without their salary during that period of time. All of that will disrupt the country, and all of that was avoidable. In fact, if the Speaker of the House had just stuck to the agreement that he had reached over a period of weeks, we would not be in this situation, sort of heading toward a government shutdown with last-minute demands made by tweet. In my state of Maryland, we had a provision to deal with the disaster of the collapse of the Key Bridge in Baltimore City. We all know the story there. A big ship hit the pylon, brought down the bridge. We lost a number of souls who had been working on that bridge. We worked to get the debris out of the bottom of the river so that we could reopen the port, but the next step is to replace the Key Bridge. And just as the country came together to support the people in Minnesota after the collapse of the Minneapolis Bridge, the Maryland delegation is asking the same of our colleagues. And we were heartened by the fact that Republicans and Democrats did come together in the spirit of all for one and one for all to help Maryland just as we're helping other states, red states, blue states, purple states. At the bottom line, the important thing is they're red, white, and blue states, and we're helping the people in all those states in their hour of hurt after disasters hit their states. I heard our colleague from North Carolina, Senator Tillis, who's worked very hard to get relief for the people of North Carolina, talking about how he doesn't, plan to support any continuing resolution that doesn't include relief for the people of North Carolina. And that is the sentiment we should all share, not only because it's the right thing to do, but because we recognized it was the right thing to do when we negotiated that bipartisan agreement. So this moment should be a wake-up call to everybody as we look to the next 4 years, because this republic will be on very shaky grounds if one or two tweets can throw the whole place into disarray and lead us toward a government shutdown. I will also point out the fact that the president-elect asked for an early increase in the nation's debt ceiling sent a very clear signal as to what his priority is. His priority is to cut taxes for very rich people and very big corporations. And to make that easier, they want to raise the debt ceiling now, rather than take responsibility for it themselves down the road. So this is a preview of what the priorities of the incoming administration are and the lengths that they're prepared to go to bring this place to a halt to achieve their goals. And by the way, I'm sure that the richest guy in the world will just get even richer with those tax cuts that would be coming down the line. So I really urge our Republican colleagues in the House to keep their word, stick with the agreement that we reached. It's a compromise agreement. It has things in it that I would not have put in it if I were to draft this myself. And it leaves things out that I'd like to see included. That's the nature of compromise in divided government, which we have right now. So, Mr. President, I really hope that smarter, cooler heads will prevail, and not when they get a tweet that says jump, say, how high should I jump? But to really think about whether that's the way to govern in the years ahead. So, Mr. President, now I do want to turn to the matter that I had planned to talk about before this latest disruption, and that is the terrible ongoing killings, starvation, and humanitarian disaster in Sudan. 2 weeks ago, I came to this Senate floor to discuss this same issue and to explain why I had filed what's known as a Joint Resolution of Disapproval, a JRD, to block the Biden administration's request to send offensive weapons, including advanced rockets and missiles worth $1.2 billion to the United Arab Emirates. I was joined in filing a joint resolution of disapproval by my House colleague, Congresswoman Sarah Jacobs. She filed that on the House side. And as I said when I introduced that joint resolution of disapproval, it was based on credible reports and investigations, including by the United Nations, that found that the UAE has been transferring arms to a group called the Rapid Support Forces in Sudan, further fueling this terrible conflict that has already claimed thousands and thousands of lives and created one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world. And it's my view that the United States should use all of our leverage to help bring peace and stability to the people of Sudan. It's the right thing to do from a humanitarian point of view. It's also in America's interests to stop the fighting. And certainly the United States should not be rewarding any country that is fueling the conflict. That's why Congresswoman Jacobs and I filed that JRD, because we want to use our influence to prevent the United Arab Emirates from sending weapons to the murderous RSF. And after we filed the joint resolution of disapproval, we wrote a letter to President Biden, dated December 2nd, 2024, outlining our goals, and again, stressing the fact that the objective was not to end arms transfers forever to the UAE. The objective was to use our leverage to get the UAE to stop sending weapons to the RSF, which the United States has charged with war crimes and ethnic cleansing in Sudan. So I'm here on the floor 2 weeks later to say that yesterday we received a letter from the Biden administration, specifically from the White House coordinator for the Middle East and North Africa, Brett McGurk, stating, and I'm going to quote here from the letter, stating that the UAE has informed the administration that it is not now transferring any weapons to the RSF and will not do so going forward. The letter goes on to say the administration will work with relevant departments and agencies to monitor for indicators of the credibility and reliability of these assurances provided by the UAE. And by January 17th, I commit to providing you with the executive branch's up-to-date assessment in that regard. And Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to put this letter in the record.
Without objection.
Because we've achieved our objective, which is to get the UAE to provide those assurances to the Biden administration, and to get the Biden administration to assure us that they will monitor compliance with those assurances, we will not be insisting on a vote on the JRD at this time, which is our right because it's a privileged motion that can be brought up at any time. But I want to thank the Biden administration. I want to thank the White House and the National Security Council for working with us to achieve what I know are our mutual objectives, which is to prevent the RSD from getting arms from any party. If you look at what's happening there, you will find the situation getting worse and worse. Since the brutal conflict in Sudan began between the Sudanese armed forces and the Rapid Support Forces back in April 2023, a staggering 11.8 million people have been displaced within Sudan or fled to neighboring countries. More than half the population, that's 25 million people, face acute food insecurity. And while the total casualty numbers have been difficult to determine, a study from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine's Sudan Research Group estimates that more than 60,000 people have died in the Khartoum region alone between April 2023 and June 2024. And in a hearing before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, a committee on which I serve, the U.S. Special Envoy to Sudan, Tom Perriello, suggested that the total death toll could be as high as 150,000 people. Both the RSF and the SAF have worsened this crisis, with both parties credibly accused of using starvation as a weapon of war by intentionally blocking humanitarian aid from reaching those most in need. The United States has determined that both the RSF and the SAF have committed war crimes. The State Department has also concluded that the Rapid Support Forces have committed crimes against humanity and ethnic cleansing. I want to remind my colleagues that this organization, the Rapid Support Forces, traces its roots to the Janjaweed militias and is led by a man known as Hamedi, who, along with others in the RSF, participated in the genocide in Darfur in the early 2000s. So these are bad people, and we should not be helping any country or sending arms to any country that is aiding and abetting their actions in Sudan. And yet, that's what credible reports have shown. In January, a UN panel of experts documented credible allegations that the UAE was violating the Darfur arms embargo, which was first established back in 2005 to stop the genocide in Darfur. These findings have been corroborated by credible human rights organizations and an independent investigation by the New York Times, which found that the UAE smuggled weapons to the RSF under the guise of humanitarian aid. That's why it was important that we act. The United States is trying to reach an end to the conflict. We should not be sending any weapons to any country that is helping fuel that conflict. So I appreciate the administration's willingness to work with us to obtain such assurances from the UAE and to create an accountability mechanism to monitor its compliance with those commitments. And I want to thank my colleagues here, Senator Cardin, the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, my colleague from Maryland, Senator Schumer, the leader, and their teams for working with us and the administration to get those assurances from the UAE and to create that accountability structure to monitor compliance with those assurances. And while I will not be seeking a vote on the JRD today, if in January the administration determines that the UAE has not been compliant with those promises, commitments, and assurances, then of course we retain the right to refile the joint resolution of disapproval in the new Congress to block arms sales from the United States to the UAE, that $1.3 billion sale. As President Biden said in September of this year, and I quote, "The United States will not abandon our commitment to the people of Sudan who deserve freedom, peace, and justice. We call on all parties to this conflict to end the violence and refrain from fueling it for the future of Sudan and for all the Sudanese people," unquote. And that is why our message has been that any country that is supplying any actor in this brutal civil war must stop doing so. That is why Congresswoman Jacobs and I filed the joint resolution of disapproval against the proposed arms sales to the UAE, because they have, based on credible allegations, been sending weapons to the murderous RSF. That's also why we will not seek a vote now on that JRD, because the Biden administration received those assurances that I just read out loud on the Senate floor from the UAE and has committed to monitoring them. So let's hope this puts an end to the chapter of the UAE sending weapons to this murderous organization where so many were responsible for the genocide in Darfur 20 years ago, and who today, according to the United States government, are committing war crimes, crimes against humanity, and ethnic cleansing. We should do everything in our power as a country to end that suffering. And that is why we took the measure we did, and that's why I'm grateful that the administration worked with us to reach this point, and it's why we will continue to monitor this situation to make sure that those arms shipments do not happen in the future. I thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
The senator from Vermont.
I rise today to speak about the concern everyone in this chamber has about the jeopardy of disaster assistance to the communities that so desperately need it. We had an agreement. We had an agreement that was reached between House Republicans and Democrats in bipartisan agreement here in the Senate. And it was to provide desperately needed disaster relief to citizens who were in the eye of storms in Vermont, in North Carolina, in Iowa, in Texas, $100 million. And what that meant in Vermont was that communities that had put money out to fix culverts, to repair bridges, to realign roads, and who were expecting the money from FEMA in this disaster assistance suddenly are on hold. Will they get it? And we don't know at this moment. Farms, where farmers had lost their crops in July of 23, and we had another flood in July of 24, and where couples who were running these farms and making existential decisions about whether they could keep farming, and we need them. We need them to be able to keep farming. We need it for Vermont, and we need it to show respect for our farmers, are awaiting an answer as to whether this disaster relief will come through. This is going to be a huge impact on Vermont. Our property taxpayers who suffer from enormously high property taxes, they'll be pounded if that relief doesn't get back to those communities where they fronted money for that culvert repair, the bridge repair, the road repair. And our small businesses that have been hammered as well and are awaiting an answer on whether they can get relief from the assistance in that program. And homeowners who have been told that they can get money for a buyout because their home was destroyed in a flood. And what a horrible thing for folks to have to go through. A lot of that happened in July of 2023. But then to have to go through the constant uncertainty and bureaucratic delays that have been so rampant in FEMA. And we had this moment where $100 billion was going to be available to help in Vermont and other states where this relief is necessary. And it's not right that after we have this agreement negotiated on a bipartisan basis, it's pulled out from underneath us. And by the way, one of the great experiences I've had in the United States Senate was working with colleagues, my Republican colleagues, like Thom Tillis and like Ted Budd from North Carolina, whose citizens suffered an enormous loss from what happened in Hurricane Helene. Wiped out bookstores in Asheville, restaurants in Asheville needing help. And it was so gratifying to me to see that all of us, whether we represented folks in a red state or a blue state, whether the constituents who were in need voted for Trump or Harris, it just didn't matter. Our obligation was to help them. And that is a basic responsibility that this Congress has when our citizens, through no fault of their own, suffer enormous economic loss as a result of a natural weather event. We had this agreement. What happened? Literally, we had this agreement. Speaker Johnson signed off on it. Leadership here signed off on it. Mr. Musk sent out a tweet. He didn't like it, and he blew the entire thing up. And how is it that one person can have so much power to destroy something that the American people really need? $277 million contribution to a campaign gets you a seat at the table, maybe the head seat at the table. And that flat out is wrong. The American people, those folks who suffered in Asheville, North Carolina, in Lyndonville, Vermont, they are entitled to immediate action. So we don't know what the next few hours are going to be. But what I know is that I will not abandon Vermonters. I will not abandon Americans who are counting on this disaster relief. I am going to hang in there to make certain I do every single thing I can to help the Vermonters and the North Carolinians and the folks in Iowa, in Texas, in Louisiana, who have been in the path of these terrible storms. Mr. President, I yield back.
Mr. President.
Our senator from Michigan.
Thank you, Mr. President. In a few moments, I'll be asking unanimous consent on a special person to be the federal co-chair of the Great Lakes Authority. But let me speak a little bit first about him. Matthew Kaplan has been nominated to serve as the federal co-chair of the Great Lakes Authority, and he really is an excellent choice for co-chair. I'm so pleased that his nomination was reported out of the EPW committee by voice vote in November. Matthew and I have a connection through his work for Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur, who is my partner in creating the Great Lakes Authority, which we successfully created back in 2022. I'm so proud that we secured the first batch of funding to be able to start the program earlier this year. And by combining federal money with state resources, the Great Lakes Authority will serve as a new economic development agency for the Great Lakes region. And let me say, most regions of the country already have an economic development authority. The Great Lakes are one of just a couple that have not had over the years. And so this fills that gap, and I'm pleased that I was originally working with this on with Senator Rob Portman here in the Senate, and our great Marcy Kaptur has been the champion in the House. This important partnership will give state and local governments the tools they need to promote economic development and job creation, restore and protect our Great Lakes, ensure the region continues to lead on manufacturing, and so much more. Matt is a terrific nominee to lead the new authority. He was a key advisor to Congresswoman Kaptur in her leadership of the Energy and Water Appropriations Subcommittee, the bipartisan and bicameral Great Lakes Task Force, and in drafting the legislation to create the Great Lakes Authority. This experience will undoubtedly help him hit the ground running in his role as federal co-chair. He is also eager to be a change maker on behalf of the region. I urge the Senate to advance his nomination by unanimous consent so that Matthew can get to work. And with that, Mr. President, I would ask unanimous consent that, as if in executive session, the Senate consider the following nomination on calendar 834, Matthew Kaplan to be federal co-chair of the Great Lakes Authority, that the Senate vote on the nomination without intervening action or debate, that if confirmed, the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table, and the President be immediately notified of the Senate's actions.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
The objection is heard. Yes. Our senator from Utah.
Mr. President, reserving the right to object, I appreciate the passion and sincerity and the hard work of my friend and colleague, the distinguished senator from Michigan, and who's a dear friend and whose presence I will miss here. We have a situation in which We've got a new administration coming on board, and President-elect Trump has asked that we hold off on confirming additional presidential nominees until he gets into office. It's an understandable request, a request that particularly in these circumstances, I agree with. And on that basis, I object. Thank you.
Objection is heard.
Madam President.
Senator from Virginia.
Madam President, are we in a quorum call?
We are not.
Madam President, as I come to the floor today, as we all know, this is a time of incredible international instability. If you turn on the news, you're confronted with tragic images of conflict and displacement in Gaza and the West Bank, broader violence and upheaval in the Middle East and Syria and Lebanon, and the ongoing violence in Ukraine with Russia's illegal invasion. Now, each of these crises deserve our attention. Well, many of us may not know. If you look all across the world in terms of what conflict are there more people impacted daily, either through hunger, humanitarian, or literally acts of war, where are there more deaths than Gaza, Ukraine, and Middle East combined? And that is the ongoing war in Sudan. This is a conflict between two warring parties, no good guys here, fueled by external actors, in which violence has caused tens of millions to flee their homes, and has left more than half of Sudan's 50 million population literally on the brink of starvation. The International Rescue Committee recently affirmed that this is the biggest humanitarian crisis ever recorded. Think about that. Bigger than Darfur 20 years ago, bigger than some of us who remember the We Are the World and the horrible tragedy of starvation in Ethiopia. This is the biggest humanitarian crisis ever recorded. Yet, for the most part, the Sudanese people feel forgotten by the world. I rise today because this conflict must not be ignored, and because America must lead, not back away, in times like these when suffering and terror are at their peak. At the heart of this crisis is the ongoing violence between the Sudanese Armed Forces, or they're called SAF, and the Rapid Support Forces, RSF, fighting for control over this country. It is estimated the fighting and resulting flood crisis have killed upwards of more than 100,000 Sudanese and left literally millions on the verge of starvation. Both SAF and RSF have inflicted horrible tragedies and atrocities on the people of Sudan. The State Department has accused members of both SAF and RSF of war crimes, while the members of the RSF and allied militias stand accused of crimes against humanity and ethnic cleansing. A recent United Nations report documents large-scale human rights and international humanitarian law violations by both sides. And also, particularly with RSF, horrific alleged sexual crimes, including, quote, widespread sexual and gender-based violence, rape, sexual slavery, abduction, and recruitment, abuse, and use of children in hostilities. These atrocities over nearly 2 years of conflict have left the Sudanese population, more than 50 million in total, over 25 million of those, in desperate need of food assistance. Health and sanitation conditions have contributed to spiraling outbreaks of cholera, malaria, dengue fever, and other diseases. Our ambassador to the United Nations said in recent months that this conflict and resulting conditions placed on millions of Sudanese, quote, are on the verge of generational famine. Due to these conditions, more than 14 million Sudanese have been forced to flee their homes, with large numbers actually seeking refuge in neighboring countries, which, again, risked broader destabilization. I think one of the newest countries in the world, very poor, South Sudan. If you're fleeing to South Sudan or Chad or Ethiopia, because Sudan is in such challenging states, that could lead to destabilization across all of East Africa. You know, and as much as we cite these statistics, the real truth is we don't really know, because this civil war has, for the most part, completely excluded all outside media. what I've learned over the last year, and there are other members of this body who've spoken on this issue, the one thing that's clear to me, this is a catastrophe. First and foremost, the Sudanese people need humanitarian aid and aid workers, humanitarian actors, and local Sudanese volunteers need safe access to respond. But despite public promises to the contrary, both SAF and the RSF have consistently erected physical and bureaucratic barriers to deny, delay, and otherwise hinder humanitarian aid from reaching those displaced civilians, and even at times targeting and literally killing aid workers. As we mark the human tragedies of this conflict, we must also recognize the conflict's political tragedy. The outbreak of this violence a couple years ago just came after the historic pro-democracy protests that swept parts of Sudan in 2019, when literally hundreds of civic, professional, and political organizations came to call for an end and actually just got rid of then President Omar al-Bashir's government. That government had lasted since 1989, for 30 years. And it had, again, a historic record of deprived citizens and trampling on human rights. So what happened was these groups came together, ousted Bashir with the promise of a democracy government. Yet both sides, after a year or so of some back and forth, instead started this warring civil war that, rather than bring democratic reform, has again brought unprecedented levels of violence, brutality, and deprivation. Now, the Biden administration has helped. They are currently the largest donor of humanitarian aid. And just today, added $200 million more to that humanitarian aid. The Biden administration, again, through the special envoy for Sudan, Tom Perriello, a former congressman from Virginia, I might add, has leveraged sanctions to pressure actors fueling the conflict. And that has resulted in increased humanitarian aid into the country, and has particularly provided critical assistance to local responders, including the Sudanese emergency response rooms, which were community members in Sudan at oftentimes at risk of their own lives, have been truly incredible on the ground. They actually were nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Yet, despite this aid, the violence continues to escalate, not de-escalate. And starvation, disease, and death are increasing, not decreasing. So we can't just look at the current conditions and say anything other than the following: that we, and frankly the world, has come up short on this conflict. The vacuum created by the lack of a coordinated international response has been filled by a considerable degree of outside influence, with foreign governments and foreign entities, frankly, backing proxies on both sides. Russia, always willing to spend and spread mischief, is actually fueling parts of warring factions on both sides. The UAE, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, in many ways are allies. They have supported humanitarian aid, but at the same time, they've almost created a proxy battle, with UAE supporting the RSF, and oftentimes Saudi Arabia and Egypt supporting SAF, which really needs to be called out. Foreign business entities are profiting literally billions and billions of dollars from this conflict. This week, I sent a letter to President Biden, along with Senator Risch and other bipartisan colleagues, urging the administration to take additional steps to ensure that humanitarian aid continues to flow, and that the actual external parties who are fueling the conflict be held accountable, including in particular the administration to sanction business entities profiting from the illegal and illicit smuggling of Sudanese gold. Many of us remember the conflicts in Central Africa years ago with blood diamonds. In many ways, in size and scale, the profiting coming from mining, extraction, and then smuggling of Sudanese gold dwarfs those other activities. Truth is, Sudan is one of Africa's largest gold producers and one of the world's largest gold producers, and has a gold industry literally worth billions of dollars. And while both SAF and RSF control some of the mines, the RSF controls the vast majority, and over the past decade, its leadership has frankly funded a lot of itself by taking that gold and illegally smuggling it to then raise money for arms, for propaganda, and to fund their efforts. The United States Department of Treasury has identified gold operations as a vital source of revenue for the RSF. And this has been documented by the United Nations, that these revenues go directly into fueling this conflict. And while the true scale of this whole illicit gold network is obscured, the truth is most of this gold's ending up in companies in the UAE. Reports have further linked not only this gold going to the UAE, but also the notorious Russia Wagner Group has been skimming off part of this and using these funds to support conflict from Wagner Group, not only in other proxy wars in Africa, but also back to help Russia in Ukraine. Now, finally, the Treasury Department has taken steps in recent months to designate certain commercial entities in the UAE for sanctions, but more can and must be done to disrupt these revenue streams. We must stop all of the revenue that's going to funding, again, the conflict where more people are displaced and die every day than Gaza and Ukraine combined. Through tools like the Global Magnitsky Act and executive orders already in the books, the administration can and must hold to account not only the warring parties, but also these external actors who are aiding and abetting this conflict. And we must stop these foreign entities, some who are our allies, from arming these warring parties. As I mentioned before, there are detailed and well-reported allegations from news organizations and from our intelligence community about foreign weapons and other support into the hands of both RSF and SAF. Media reports point to alleged involvement, as I mentioned, from many countries, Saudi, UAE, Egypt, into arms in this region. And while there are decades-old arms embargoes that impacted the Darfur region in Sudan, this new conflict is at a new scale and takes in wide swaths of the country that weren't in conflict in Darfur. It's time for the United States, alongside its allies and partners, to urge the UN Security Council to expand the existing Darfur embargo across all of Sudan. We must make clear to all countries around the world that any foreign government or entity that is providing support for either side of this civil war that allows it to continue to drag on, to have this massive worst humanitarian crisis ever, those entities must be held accountable. And beyond foreign actors stopping support to warring parties, it's incumbent on all of these countries, many which we have very close relationships, to work towards a ceasefire and a civilian government in Sudan. There's also more that can actually be done here at home. Last spring, my colleague, Senator Kaine, and I called on the Biden administration to issue a new temporary protected status, which we call TPS, for certain Sudanese individuals living in the U.S. who are unable to return to their country due to this conflict. I was pleased that in August of last year, the administration took that step, allowing those individuals not to go back to this worst conflict in the world. The problem is that designation runs out next spring. And I call on the administration to extend that designation before they leave office. One of the things that we're proud of in Virginia is that
for the last several days is actually going to be just as beholden to Elon Musk as to the President of the United States.
Well, I hope not. For goodness sakes, John Thune is a respected colleague of mine in the Senate.
On a basis that we got to do more. The fact is, the Sudanese people didn't ask for this war. They actually threw out a dictator 30 years to say we ought to bring a democracy. The rest of the world focused a little bit of attention, but then when it got messy, kind of turned away. We need a government in Sudan that reflects the struggle that the young people and civil society groups brought in 2019 and not have that promise sniffed out. We find ourselves about a month away from a new administration in Washington. Now, I've worked and pledged to work with the incoming Trump administration where I can. And make the appeal right now that Sudan should be one of those areas. We've got to make sure that we show American leadership in this crisis. The truth is, if we could actually resolve this major conflict in Africa where we show that we care about Africans killing Africans, supported by outside forces that we call our allies in certain ways, we could do remarkable things in terms of restoring America's image as a protector of democracy and the aspirations of people all over the world. We've got to also make sure that all of the international partners continue to work to bring humanitarian assistance and put their pressure as well on the funders and suppliers of the arms that go into this conflict. There are more things the administration can do. The unfortunate truth is this probably won't be resolved by January 20th. One of the things that was in the NDAA that I know the President will sign will be a more permanent status for the special envoy on Sudan. It's my hope that the Trump administration will choose someone of similar caliber to Tom Perriello to continue this critically important role. Again, I want to thank friends like the incoming chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, Jim Risch, to partner with this. This is a bipartisan issue. We can't let it lie fallow any longer. We can't forget that when we turn on these images and we see Gaza, Ukraine, Lebanon, Syria, that there's something actually worse happening in Africa that we could help bring a conclusion to. I know we can do more. I pray we will do more. And with that, Madam President, I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will the senator hold his suggestion?
Yes, I will hold my objection.
Thank you.
I will not note the absence of a quorum.
Madam President.
Senator from Nevada.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise today to talk about a subject you know a lot about as we share serving the great state of Nevada. I'm here to talk about public land management in Nevada and the challenges that my state, our state, is facing as our communities continue to grow. Some in this chamber may be unaware, but my state of Nevada is unique. We have the highest percentage of land owned by the federal government. 85% of our state is made up of federal land. Let me repeat that, 85%. This means Nevada has to rely on federal legislation to do things like making land available, to provide more affordable housing, more schools, more parks, more churches, more fire stations, police departments in every single county in Nevada. So think about that. We need to pass bills here in Congress in Washington and have the president sign them into law to do local things that most other states can just have their local governments do. And that's why in Washoe County, the second largest county in the state. Those types of everyday actions, well, they just haven't been taken in years, and we're starting to feel it. Over the last few decades, Nevada's brought in new industries and created good-paying jobs in and around Washoe County. From Reno to Sparks, we're creating jobs in technology, critical minerals, battery recycling, and so much more. And this is leading to an economic and population boom that frankly is helping our residents prosper. But it's also placing a great strain on things like the supply of housing. But again, because 85% of Nevada is made up of public lands, Washoe County relies on resource management plans to grow our community. Well, sad to say this, but the current plans on the books, and you know this well too, Madam President, they're more than 20 years old. So even as the population of the county has grown more than twice the rate of the overall U.S. population in the last decade, we're using current plans over 20 years old. As our state grows and more people move in, it's critical that we take steps to manage responsible growth and development of our local communities so we protect our beautiful public lands, we support our tribes and economic development alike. Without new federal legislation, Washoe County is stuck. They're just stuck. It can't grow, can't accommodate its increasing population, and it can't protect the spaces that people recreate or come to visit in our beautiful state. And for the last few years, I've been working closely with a diverse range of local stakeholders, from conservation and outdoor recreation groups to local governments and tribal leadership, to draft a proposal that has the best balance. You know, we released a working draft, and we took public input from Nevadans, and we developed my Truckee Meadows Public Land Management Act, or as we know it, the Washoe County Lands Bill. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the bill. My bill is balanced. It's thoughtful. It has a thoughtful approach that I've worked on for more than 4 years to do a few things. Well, we got to allow for new economic development opportunities. We have to make more land available for affordable housing. This is on the top of everyone's list. We wanted to protect nearly 1 million acres of land for recreation in our gorgeous state. We want to convey parcels to local entities for public purposes like schools and water treatment facilities. And we want to place some of our lands into trust for 3 different tribes in northern Nevada. This bill has broad local support from Republicans and Democrats alike in Nevada. I introduced the final version of this bill nearly 1 year ago. It's gone through a committee hearing, it's been marked up, and it's been passed out of committee. My team and I have spent years discussing this legislation with relevant committees, and for months, literally for months, we've been working to include this bill in a public lands package. We've consistently reached out to senators and staffs on both sides of the aisle to get the bill passed, a bill very specific to Nevada for the benefit of Nevadans. And we have an open door for any recommended changes to get this critical legislation across the finish line. And yet, we still haven't been able to get a vote here in the Senate. And one thing I want to tell you for sure, Madam President, is I am not going to allow typical Washington gridlock like we've seen here to block this bill that my constituents, our constituents, are relying on for more affordable housing, for stronger communities, and for protecting lands. So today, I'm taking matters into my own hands. I stand here today asking for my colleagues' cooperation to support the state of Nevada, to support our ability to grow and build our communities, and protect and preserve the beauty in our great state, and support the passage of my Washoe County Lands Bill by unanimous consent. So, notwithstanding Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 604, S3593, that the committee report of the substitute amendment be agreed to, the bill as amended be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there an objection?
Madam President.
Senator from Wyoming.
Thank you, Madam President. Reserving the right to object. This bill does two things, as my friend and colleague from Nevada mentioned. It would eliminate multiple use management from hundreds of thousands of acres of federal land. It would also grant authority for the Secretary of Interior to convey thousands of acres of federal land to local governments in Nevada. Other Western states are trying to do this exact same thing. Former Majority Leader Harry Reid cut special deals in the past like this for Nevada. And I'm happy to work with my friend and colleague from Nevada. Congress should not enact another special deal for Nevada when other Western states are seeking similar legislation. Therefore, I object.
Objection is heard.
Madam President,
Senator from Nevada.
I look forward to continuing to work with the Senator from Wyoming on improving this bill. But, Madam President, for me today, it is beyond disappointing that Washington's business as usual approach is once again getting in the way of my bill passing. The legislation would not cost any additional taxpayer money, and it would not directly impact any state other than Nevada. And it would allow Washoe County to be able to serve its business community, tribal communities, and the people who live there. All it's going to do is protect our outdoor spaces. Like I said, support local tribal communities, expand economic development opportunities, including the much-needed affordable housing desperately needed by so many. So today's outcome is frustrating. I want to assure the people of Nevada that my colleagues and I will continue to work on this issue, and it is not settled, and the fight to get Nevada lands for us to be able to use in smart ways is not over. I will reintroduce this legislation next Congress, and I will continue fighting until my Washoe County Lands Bill is passed and Nevadans are better able to responsibly build in and protect our state. I yield my time.
Senator from Oregon.
Madam President, notwithstanding Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of the following bills en bloc. Cal 586, S2160, H.R. 7938, which was received from the House and is at the desk.
Is there an objection to proceeding to the measures en bloc? Without objection, the Senate will proceed en bloc.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the committee-reported substitute amendment, where applicable, be agreed to. The bills as amended, if amended, be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table, all en bloc.
Without objection.
Madam President, I'm very pleased that my legislation has just passed, and I particularly want to express my thanks to my colleague and friend, my neighbor, Senator Barrasso and his staff, John Tanner and others, Jack and Vincent and Kristen, who've been a big help in this effort. The legislation by my Republican colleague from Eastern Oregon, Congressman Bentz, is a companion bill to my bill S-482, which would uphold promises made by the federal government to farmers and tribes in the Klamath Basin. The Klamath Basin is the subject of one of the largest river restoration projects in history. As a result of this work, new habitat is being opened up to recover culturally important fish and wildlife and provide more flexibility for managing water deliveries to farmers in the Klamath Basin. The promise that was made to agricultural communities and agreed to by stakeholders in the Klamath Basin is that they would receive support for the work that must now be completed to avoid conflict, work like putting fish screens on water diversions. I commend the House for passing this legislation on suspension, and I'm really pleased that my colleagues on both sides of the aisle are going to allow us to make sure that we don't lose this critical and timely opportunity to finally live up to a promise made to these local communities nearly a decade ago. Madam President, I'll close by this. I promised that I would have an open to all town hall meeting in every county in my state. I just cleared town hall meeting number 1,100. That means that 1,100 times for 90 minutes, we just said we're going to throw open the doors of government and listen to folks. Make sure that I'm not giving any speeches or using any teleprompters or whatever, just letting people share their views. And it was there that I heard about this idea that is being advanced now on a bipartisan basis. Congressman Bentz, my colleague from Eastern Oregon, myself, my home is in Southeast Portland, urban and rural, Democrats and Republicans coming together to do something that makes a lot of sense. And I want to also, while I'm making these remarks, thank my senatorial colleague, Senator Merkley, who is a senior member of the Appropriations Committee, has been doing so much good work on the Klamath over the years. The passage of this legislation tonight is a good win for rural Oregon, long overdue. And Madam President, with that, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from California.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Energy and Natural Resources be discharged from further consideration of H.R. 5509 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration, that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection. Is there an objection?
Madam President.
Senator from Wyoming.
Madam President, reserving the right to object, this bill is not the right response to address the permitting challenges at the Department of Interior. The bill would create a duplicative database, and the database would lack privacy protections for sensitive business information. I'm committed to addressing permitting challenges. This bill is not the right answer, and therefore, Madam President, I object.
Objection is heard.
Madam President.
Senator from California.
I ask unanimous consent that, notwithstanding Rule 22, the Senate proceed to the consideration of Senate Resolution 936, submitted earlier today.
The clerk will report.
Senate Resolution 936, congratulating the Los Angeles Galaxy for winning the 2024 Major League Soccer Cup.
Is there an objection to proceeding to the measure? Without objection.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and that the motions to reconsider be made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
Madam President.
Senator from California.
Madam President, as we conclude the final week of the 118th Congress, and we a truly historic Biden-Harris administration, we look back on the biggest accomplishments of this body. Now, serving on the Senate Judiciary Committee alongside my partners over the years, Senators Dianne Feinstein, Senator LaFonza Butler, and as of last week, Senator Adam Schiff, I'm particularly proud to have played a role in the confirmation of a nearly record number of President Biden's federal judicial nominees. Now, today, I want to ask for your support on the final two nominees that are awaiting confirmation by this body. So first, let me introduce to you Judge Serena Murillo, President Biden's nominee to serve on the U.S. District Court for the Central District of California, the proud daughter of a waitress and a Mexican-American farm worker who went back to school to become a teacher. Judge Murillo was born in Pomona, California. She earned her undergraduate degree from the University of California, San Diego, and earned her law degree from Loyola Law School in Los Angeles. And after a year in private practice, Judge Murillo joined the District Attorney's Office in Los Angeles, where she served as a prosecutor for the next 17 years. In the District Attorney's Office, she served as both a trial and appellate attorney. And throughout her time there, she tried 68 cases to verdict. Now, since 2015, Judge Murillo has served as a judge on the Los Angeles Superior Court and was even appointed Justice Pro Tem in the California Court of Appeal, Second Appellate District from 2018 to 2019. Her deep experience across the whole spectrum of criminal and civil law and her reputation for thoughtfulness, fair-mindedness, courtesy, and hard work on the bench will make her a tremendous district attorney if she earns this body's support. And on her behalf, and on behalf of the people of California, I ask for your aye vote for this nomination. Now, this week we will also consider the nomination of Judge Benjamin Cheeks to serve on the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of California. Judge Cheeks was born in Albany, Georgia, and raised by a single mother who worked multiple jobs to provide for him and his siblings. Recognizing that education was the key to a better future, he worked hard and earned a full scholarship to attend the University of Miami. And he went on to earn his law degree from American University Washington College of Law. After law school, Judge Cheek served as an assistant district attorney in Manhattan for 7 years. And then the light went off. He made his way to California, where he served as an assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of California. 3 years later, he started his own criminal defense practice, serving on a panel to represent defendants who could not afford private attorneys. And earlier this year, Judge Cheeks was unanimously selected by members of the U.S. District Court for the Southern District to serve as magistrate judge. That says a lot. And it says a lot about the qualifications, the values, and the approach, and the great service he'll provide as a district judge with your support. So, Madam President, two more than qualified, more than ready to serve nominees awaiting our confirmation. I ask you, colleagues, for your support. And Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that my next statement appear at a separate place in the record.
Without objection.
Madam President and colleagues, I rise today to congratulate and to thank Congressman Tony Cárdenas as he prepares to retire after 12 distinguished years of service in the United States House of Representatives and 28 years in public service overall. Since his time in the House, he's been a tremendous, aggressive, effective, and passionate member of the California delegation in particular, and one of the true stars of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. He's my fellow Tiger from San Fernando High School. He was my first boss in politics, and more recently, to the thrill of our wives, my roommates here in Washington. For many decades now, Tony has been a cherished friend and truly a brother in politics and in life. Tony Cárdenas is the champion for the San Fernando Valley and has been for nearly 3 decades. And Tony's story and legacy deserves to be celebrated and remembered. And that's why I choose to make these remarks today so they are a permanent record, yes, even here in the United States Senate. Now, he was raised just a few blocks from where I grew up, in the proud working class community of Pacoima. Antonio Tony Cárdenas was born on March 31st, 1963, the youngest of 11 children born to Andrés y María Cárdenas. And yes, Tony is just a few years ahead of me, but our stories followed similar paths. Tony's parents and my father were from the same state of Jalisco in Mexico, and they immigrated to the United States in search of a better life, in pursuit of the American dream, colleagues, that you know I fight so hard to defend. We both attended Telfair Elementary School, went on to attend San Fernando High School, and when it came time to attend college, despite discouragement from some of our teachers, we both went on to college and earned engineering degrees. Yet it's in part because of Tony and his passion and commitment to community that I left what could have been a very promising and fruitful career in engineering to pursue public service. When Tony first set out to make a difference and run for the state assembly in 1996, he actually took a chance on me, asking me to be his campaign manager. When he asked, I couldn't help but be honest. I looked at him and I said, Tony, I don't know the first thing about running campaigns. I think he was equally honest, because he looked right back at me and said, well, I know the first thing about running for office. But you know me, I know you, We're smart, we're committed, we're hardworking. We'll figure this out together. I think we kind of did. I was pretty young at the time, like literally fresh out of college. But he took a leap of faith on me, and I took a leap of faith on him, like many, many young people, right? You're cynical about politicians and about government, but I knew who Tony was as a person. I knew his values, I knew his work ethic, I knew his moral compass, aside from having so much in common growing up. And I knew just how committed he was to our community and to making change. See, Tony had previously left engineering and entered real estate. He had his own very successful real estate company. He could have moved on to live anywhere else and been tremendously successful in the private sector, but he chose to leave that and enter public service to improve the quality of life of the folks that we grew up with. And from his very first election to the state assembly, and he was an underdog candidate, trust me, but he was successful, to the times when he and I worked together on the Los Angeles City Council, to the last few years when we've served together here in the halls of Congress. I've been blessed, not just because of his mentorship, not just because of his friendship, but to just have a front row seat to his public service career. I've seen him and I've been inspired by him in his fights for justice and opportunities for at-risk youth, him leading the charge in our nation's clean energy transition. Again, something that started years ago in prior offices, but he's continued here at the national level through his work in Congress, and his advocacy for better access to mental health care. He's done so much in a number of policy areas. But what I admire most is sort of the through line in his narrative and in his career is that he's never shied away from a righteous fight. The most righteous fights, as you know, are often the most hard battles to fight. Tony never shied away from that. And he won a heck of a lot more often than he didn't, because it was the right thing to do. And I also appreciate and reflect on his public service and the way he's gone about carving out a path for others to follow. And I mentioned his first run for the state legislature in 1996. I take you back to a time where even in the state of California, there were not nearly as many Latinos in positions of power at the federal or state or even the local level. But through the power of his example, he's opened the door for so many others, including me, to dream of running for office, to think of running for office, to actually run for office, to win the opportunity and to serve well. Yes, colleagues, entire generations of young Latino leaders now see running for office and having a say in the decisions that affect our communities as the norm, not the exception. And it's in part, large part, because of the trailblazing legacy of Tony Cardenas. And I'd be remiss if I didn't take a moment to thank his wife, Norma, and his 4 children, Vanessa, Cristian, Andres, and Alina, and the entire Cardenas family for sharing him with us for all these years. And while next month, Tony will officially step away from his work in the United States House of Representatives, I have no doubt that his service to others is not coming to an end. It will continue. And I look forward to continuing to fight alongside him for many, many years to come. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.
Your choice of creamy chocolate or vanilla fresh frozen custard with rich Dove chocolate pieces, sweet raspberries,
and the low commodity prices, farmers are going out of business. I don't understand this consolidation of farming in America and why the Democrats are in favor of that. We have got to support our farmers through this bill. We have got to support our disaster victims through this bill. And most of all, we must support America. We are not here for ourselves. We are here for those that we represent, the hardworking Americans who depend on us to set aside our differences and act with courage and responsibility. They deserve a government that works for them and not against us. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. The gentleman from Oklahoma reserves. The chair would remind my colleagues to allow speakers to be heard. The gentlewoman from Connecticut is recognized.
I just remind my colleague and friend from Missouri that the compromise bill had support for the farmers, overwhelming support for farmers and for American families as well. At this time, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Massachusetts, the distinguished ranking member of the Ways and Means Committee, Mr. Neal.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are in favor of every request that you asked for. These were modest agreements that were reached and rendered by both parties in an honest and public agreement. The Speaker of the House broke his word. That's why we're here. And to the gentleman from Missouri who just spoke, I've been here for a long time. You have never won a government shutdown, and you won't win this one either. Your currency in this institution is your word. We reached an agreement. We came to modest achievements. And a tweet changed all of it? Can you imagine what the next 2 years are going to be like if every time the Congress works its will and then there's a tweet or from an individual who has no official portfolio, who threatens members on the Republican side with a primary, and they succumb? This institution has a separate responsibility based upon the separation of powers. Members of Congress don't serve under presidents of the United States. It's called the national principle. I'm in favor of aid to North Carolina. I'm in support of aid to the farmers in Missouri. We come to the aid of the American family at moments like this. But you walked away from your word. You walked away from an agreement. That's what we're bothered by. A simple suggestion from the president-elect that you ought to abandon that principle? And this is what this is about. This is trying to raise the debt ceiling.
Do you know the U.S. solar company's nasty little secret? It turns out if you live in Illinois, they have to give you solar panels for absolutely no net cost. All you have to do is ask. Solar companies in the U.S. are trying everything to keep this away from the public, but it's slowly leaking out. And it's all because of the Inflation Reduction Act our government announced just 1 month ago. As a part of America's efforts to fight climate change, our government practically started handing out next-generation solar panels and power walls at no net cost to anyone who qualifies for this program. It's crazy. So if you are currently talking to any solar companies in the US, stop. Just tap below and see if your zip code qualifies and take advantage of this crazy solar opportunity before its budgets are gone.
Some moments don't need words, just a shared plate and the people who make it special. Find the perfect place for your special moments on Open Table.
Gentleman will suspend. The gentlewoman from Connecticut reserves. The chair would remind my colleagues to direct comments to the chair. The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I yield to my good friend, the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Luna, for 2 minutes.
The gentlewoman from Florida is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I've never actually voted for a CR, but I'm here today because I realize that the plan that's on the table currently to keep our government open, but also the promise from the only president in my lifetime who's ever followed through on all of his campaign promises to the American people. Excuse me, I'm not done talking. Give me the same respect we give you guys.
The House will come to order. My colleagues are reminded the gentlewoman has the floor. She has the right to be heard. The gentlewoman has the right to be heard, and the gentlewoman would be reminded to direct her comments to the chair. The gentlewoman from Florida is recognized.
From the only president in my lifetime who's fulfilled all of his campaign promises to the American people, has promised to cut hundreds of billions of dollars in reconciliation. You want to talk about shutting down the government. The deal that was negotiated was largely rejected by the American people, which, to Speaker Johnson's credit, pulled it from the floor, which is why we are here today. The deal on the table will keep the government open for the American people, and if you guys so choose to shut it down, it will be on you, but not the Republican Party. We will not be going back to the table. This deal stands as it is, so let you go back home on Christmas and explain to your people why you shut down the government, because we won't be doing it.
The House.
Furthermore, Mr. Speaker.
The House will be in order. The House will be in order. The gentlewoman is reminded to direct her comments to the chair. My colleagues are reminded to yield the floor to the gentlewoman from Florida.
Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, the former bill had items in it to include random pandemic policies, biocontaminant research that were not in the best interest of the American people. So the deal on the table is as is. You either vote for or you vote for the shutdown, but it will be not on the Republican Party, but on Democrats as it stands. Mr. Speaker, I yield my time.
Gentlewoman yields. My colleagues, the chair acknowledges the emotion and passion behind all arguments. Please, the House will be in order. The gentleman from Oklahoma reserves. The gentleman from Oklahoma reserves. The gentlewoman from Connecticut is recognized.
A deal is a deal. I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from New Jersey, the distinguished ranking member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, Mr. Pallone.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Have the Republicans forgotten that they're in the majority? The bill that was supposed to come up was posted and negotiated by the Republican Speaker. He posted it. He negotiated it. And you know that the bill that you're bringing up instead tonight will not pass. We will leave here tonight. This bill will not pass. And so you are the ones that are creating the shutdown. You have the power to decide what bills come to the floor. You are putting a bill on this floor that you know will not pass and will lead to a Republican shutdown. It's on you because you have the majority. Now, I want to talk about this other bill that was supposed to come up and that you refused to bring up. This bill was negotiated because we realized, for one, in our committee, the Energy and Commerce Committee, that people were suffering, right? They were suffering from high drug prices because of pharmaceutical benefit plans, PBMs, right? And so we put in the bill on a bipartisan basis a way of trying to bring prices down with PBM reform. We knew that consumers are being screwed all over the place, right? With shady things on website when they buy things, junk fees, all kinds of deceptive practices. So we put in on a bipartisan basis that we were going to get rid of junk fees, that we were going to get rid of deceptive practices, whether it went to a concert or a hotel or whatever it happened to be, because we cared on a bipartisan basis to try to bring prices down, to try to make things more fair for the consumer, for the American people. You took all that out. Why? Because a billionaire, Elon Musk, decided that we were going to act in favor, or the Republicans were supposed to act in favor of corporate interests, in favor of billionaires, in favor of special interests. That's what's going on here. You jettisoned all the things that we worked on a bipartisan basis to try to bring prices down, be fair to the American people, protect the consumer, protect the environment, protect safety, and instead you decide to simply go ahead with something that you know will not pass, that will shut the government down. Don't tell me this is on our watch. This is on your watch. You're the majority. You're responsible. This is not going to pass. The government's going to shut down, and the American people are going to suffer because of you as Republicans. I yield back.
Speaker, colleagues are reminded to direct their comments to the chair. The gentlewoman from Connecticut reserves. The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. You know, we've had a lot of talk about what's not in this bill. Maybe we ought to talk a little bit about what's in this bill. It keeps the government open, which my friends say they want to do, and I think they're sincere in that. This does that. It provides relief to people in the various disaster areas around the country at an amount that they agree to, and we agree to, and we share that in common. It provides aid for farmers who've suffered through several years of droughts and disaster and a systemic crisis that, as my friend from Missouri mentioned, is costing us farms. It extends important health care provisions into the next year. There's nothing in here you're against. There's not a single thing in this bill that you oppose. So if you can't vote for what you're for, please don't lecture us about what, if I had this and this and this, I'd vote for it. You vote no, you're voting to shut down the government. If you vote no, you're voting to deny aid to people with disaster. If you vote no, you're voting against helping American farmers and ranchers at a difficult time. And if you vote no, you're voting to strip important provisions that are being extended into next year. Why? Because you don't want to give the next president enough time to get organized. And you want to use the debt to leverage. The extension of the debt ceiling is what we've done for the last 2 years. It's what you supported 2 years ago. There's no change in that whatsoever. So if you want to fight other things and other battles, that's great. I welcome that debate. I think it's a legitimate debate. But you're voting against a bill that everything in it you support. Every single thing. And you're doing that for political purposes. So please don't lecture us about that. We present something that keeps the government open, that provides aid to people, that provides support for farmers, that extends important provisions, and you're not opposed to any of that, and yet you're going to oppose the bill. And if a government shutdown comes, and I sincerely hope it does not, please don't tell us that those of us that voted to keep the government open while you voted to let it close are somehow responsible. That's just not the case. So, you know, I have a rule as a legislator. I never vote against a bill because of what's not in it. I vote on the basis of the bill that comes here, and then I fight for the other things that I think are important. And extending a debt ceiling that we've done for 2 years in a bipartisan fashion so you can use it as leverage against a new president is something you ought to reconsider as a political tactic. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserved. Gentleman reserves. Members are reminded to direct their comments to the chair. The gentlewoman from Connecticut is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Moskowitz.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, denial is not just a river in Egypt. Let's talk about the last 2 years. It was the Democrats who raised the debt ceiling, not the Republicans last time. Many of you voted against it. It was the Democrats who kept over the government, not once, not twice, but every single time we needed to keep the government open, it was the Democrats who kept the government open. More of us voted for it than you. And all I've heard for the last couple of weeks about it, this giant mandate, landslide, trifecta. Put on your big boy pants, pass your own bill. We're only here because you guys can't agree amongst yourselves. So hold on a second. Democrats will keep government open for the American people. We will mediate the disagreements between that side of the room and that side of the room. We will do that for you, but you got to at least invite us to that meeting. So if you want us to solve your problem because you can't agree amongst yourselves, reach out. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Time has expired. The gentlewoman reserves. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlewoman from Connecticut.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the gentlelady. When I ran for Congress in 2018, the debt was $21 trillion. I was just texting with my son back home in Austin, who I haven't seen in quite a long time because I'm here trying to fight for him. When I got through cancer about 12 years ago, I made my promise to my kids that I would do everything I can to save this country. And what we're doing right now is to continue to double down on the things that are destroying the republic. We are going to increase the debt ceiling, not just $4 trillion, that's false. We have spent $4.7 trillion in additional debt in the last 19 months. We're going to increase the debt by $5 trillion. That's what's going to happen right here by Republicans, increasing the debt $5 trillion. And what are you doing in the same bill? $110 billion unpaid for, because you never have any ounce of self-respect to go out and campaign saying you're going to balance the budget, and then you come in here and pass $110 billion unpaid for. On top of the $200 billion you did for WEP, you guys won't agree with that, but the fact of the matter is $330 billion. Congratulations, you've added to the debt since you were given the majority again on November 5th. It's embarrassing. It's shameful. Yes, I think this bill is better than it was yesterday on certain respects, but to take this bill yesterday and congratulate yourself because it's shorter in pages but increases the debt by $5 trillion is asinine. And that's precisely what Republicans are doing. I am absolutely sickened by a party that campaigns on fiscal responsibility and has the temerity to go forward to the American people and say, you think this is fiscally responsible. It is absolutely ridiculous. It also turns off PAYGO. It turns off the $1.7 trillion in automatic cuts under PAYGO, because this side of the aisle is profoundly unserious about actually reducing deficits, just as my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are profoundly unserious about reducing deficits. The entire body has been racking up debt for my entire life. $36 trillion, $1 trillion of interest. We rack up $1 trillion every 100 days. Now, what are we going to do about it? We're going to run around and talk about cutting taxes, but not doing what's necessary to cut the spending along with the cut taxes. My other side of the aisle, my colleagues will say, oh no, we got to increase taxes, but we'll do anything to cut spending. And so here we sit in the same mess. And I got to be honest, I want to remind people, this is Article 1. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Gentlewoman reserves. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
This is a great debate. Nice to have the discussion, but we're here to consider a specific piece of legislation. This keeps the government open. What my friends want to do by voting no is effectively to shut it down. This provides relief to people in need. What my friends want to do by voting no is to keep that from happening. This provides aid to farmers and ranchers. What my friends want to do, and they actually favor the amounts and what have you, there's been no change in that regard, ends that. This extends important protections for the American people. So if a bill's got something in it and you support everything that's in it, and we continue the debt ceiling that we've had the last 2 years, then I'm mystified as to how you can go home and explain that, as I wanted to keep the government open, so I voted to shut it down. It's amazing to me. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlewoman from Connecticut.
Mr. Speaker, I am prepared to close.
Gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from Oklahoma.
I still have speakers, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I yield 1 minute to my very good friend from Ohio, the distinguished chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Jordan.
Gentleman's recognized.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, Mr. Speaker. This bill is real simple. This bill helps the people who grow our food. This bill helps people who were devastated by hurricanes this past fall. And this bill funds the government at levels the Democrats agreed to keep the government open over the holidays. Why the Democrats are opposed to this, I have no idea. I have no idea. So let's vote yes and spend at the levels everyone agreed to. And then in 3 months, we can have the debate and figure out where we're going from there. But this is a yes vote. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman reserves. Gentlewoman's recognized.
I yield.
Gentleman reserves.
I yield 30
Gentlewoman's
seconds
recognized.
to the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Cohen.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you. There are a lot of things in here that were taken out of the compromise bill that were good for the American people. And one of the things was dish payments. We give money to hospitals to treat the least among us, the poorest people that need health care, and that was taken out of the bill. That's cruel, inhuman, and anti-Judeo-Christian. And that's one of the main reasons why I oppose this bill, because the hospitals that take care of those people are doing God's work, and they need to be given the monies they've been given in the past, a 1-year extension, and you took that out. That's wrong. I oppose the bill. Thank you.
Gentleman yields. Gentlewoman reserves.
Yes.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman, my good friend from New York, Mr. Lawler.
Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, we are approaching Christmas and Hanukkah. And Americans all across this country care about this debate. They care about the specifics. But what they won't understand is when you vote no to continue funding the government to provide the services that they rely on. This is a clean CR. If you don't like it because it doesn't have a whole list of ornaments on the Christmas tree, I'm sorry. But the fact is that we are keeping the government funded. By the way, I would remind my Democratic colleagues, we could actually do our appropriations work if my senior senator from New York passed a single solitary appropriations bill on the Senate floor. He passed exactly 0. The fact is, we have to keep the government funded. That is our responsibility.
An additional 30 seconds.
Gentleman's recognized.
We have to keep the government funded, live to fight another day. The fact is that we are not shutting the government down before Christmas. And I think everyone here has a responsibility to keep the government open and funded, and it requires a yes vote on this CR. It requires a yes vote on disaster relief. It requires a yes vote on providing our farmers the support that they need to put food on the table of the American people. And with that, I yield back to the chairman.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman reserves. Gentlewoman's recognized.
Yes. Speaker, I'm prepared to close.
Gentleman reserves.
The chair, I'm also prepared to close.
Gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from Connecticut is recognized.
The American public has been clamoring for this body to work together, Democrats and Republicans, across the aisle, to do what is in the best interest of the American people. To that end, and to give credence to what the American people are clamoring for, so they begin to have trust in us again and what we do in this body, is that we've been working since last August of 2023, on a supplemental disaster relief bill. We worked assiduously over the next several months, day in and day out. And I would just say to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, I recognize I am part of what's called the Four Corners. And it was the Four Corners of the Appropriations Committee, Mr. Cole and myself and Senator Murray and Senator Collins, who wanted to get these bills done, the appropriations bills done, by December 20th, because we believed that we could have done it and get these bills done. We were told no. We were told no. That we had to have a continuing resolution that would carry us into next year. No government should be run by continuing resolutions. That is not good governance. But there are those in this body who don't know how to govern and don't care about governing. So we worked hard over the last several weeks, back and forth and back, to say, we can accept this, we can't accept that. We will do this, we will do that. We worked hard. And to talk about what some of my colleagues have said, the Democrats are in the minority in this body. When you have the pen, which is what the Republicans have, they write the bill. They write the bill. They post the bill. They agreed on a bill.
They signed it.
And you know what? They got scared because President Musk told them, President Musk said, don't do it. Don't do it. Shut the government down. Imagine. What does he know about what people go through is when the government shuts down? Are his employees furloughed? Hell no. Is he furloughed? No. And when you shut the government down, people don't get paid. And maybe if none of us got paid if the government shut down, some people on the other side of the aisle would feel differently about where we're going in this effort. We had an agreement. But you know, this is not different from what we've experienced over the last year and a half or so. Think about it. Biden, McCarthy, deal. Come together. Next day, walk away. Johnson, Schumer, deal. Next day, walk away. And now this deal, walk away from it. Who do we trust in this body? And above all, can the American people trust us? Trust us with their lives. When we had a moment, when we came to agreement as Democrats and Republicans, and then we were able to say, let's move forward this country. You know, one of my colleagues, I think it was Congressman Neal, who said this. The only currency we have in this body is our word. That's our credibility. That's our bond with each other. And when you break that bond, you break the ability to try to come together and be able to govern on behalf of the people of this country. What was left out of this bill, I understand what's in it, but what's left out is unconscionable, particularly in the areas of maternal
Gentlewoman's
mortality.
time has expired.
I implore my colleagues to vote no on this bill.
The gentlewoman yields. The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, may I inquire how much time I have left?
1.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself the balance of my time.
Gentleman's recognized.
It's been an interesting debate. It's been a good debate. It's been a lot of interesting points made. But the fact is, there's nothing in this legislation that you oppose. You don't oppose keeping the government open. This keeps it open until March 14th. We're going to be voting for that in overwhelming numbers. You support aid to people in distress. This bill does that. You're going to be voting no. We're going to be voting yes. We think the rural economy is in crisis. There's important aid in here for it. Aid, you support it. We're going to be voting for it. You're going to be voting against it. That's just the facts. You consider legislation one piece at a time. There's not a single thing in here that you oppose, except maybe the debt limit extension, which is the same debt limit extension you supported 2 years ago. So I urge my colleagues to vote yes and keep the government open, help people in need, help the rural economy, and let us move forward with our work. With that, Mr. Speaker, I urge passage of the bill and yield back.
Gentleman yields. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill, H.R. 10515? Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, for what purpose does the gentlewoman from Connecticut seek recognition?
Guess what? I request a recorded vote.
Does the gentlewoman ask?
And nays.
With great surprise, the yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote.
What is a home warranty? It's a 1-year service plan that helps cover costs when parts of your home system
On this vote, the yeas are 174, the nays are 235, one voting present, two-thirds not being in the affirmative. The rules are not suspended and the bill is not passed. Thank you. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the House will stand in recess subject to the call of the chair.